everyone, welcome to Mindful Mindsets, and today we're going to talk about a couple of really famous psychology studies. And what I want us to focus on is what we can take from these studies. So rather than worrying about whether or not we agree with the author's conclusions, whether or not we think that the studies are mostly true, I want to focus on what we can use from them and what we can learn from them, independent of their ability to be replicated. So the first study is the study on power poses. And Amy Cuddy gave a TED Talk that became the second most viewed TED Talk of all time. And I highly recommend you check it out because there is a lot of interesting information on it. And more importantly, she shares a personal story about how they helped her. And it's a moving story. So in this study, participants were asked to assume what they called a power pose. So that could be a Wonder Woman power pose, the T-arm power pose with your hands raised, any pose where they felt more powerful. They were coached on how to do it, and ultimately they found a lot of surprising and strong results. They found increased testosterone levels, decreased cortisol levels, increase in subjective confidence, increase in subjective well-being, and even an increase in risk-taking. So these were really profound results, and they even found that these hormonal changes had lasting effects. They lasted much longer than the 2-minute power pose, but actually lasted throughout the day. The second study, which is actually more of a grouping of studies, is on priming, and priming is one of the most famous examples in psychology. There was one study where participants were given a word test, that's what they thought the study was on, and they were shown, one group was shown neutral words that were just kind of random, and another group was shown words that we associate with elderly people, things like wrinkle or forgetfulness or even Florida. And what these researchers found was that the participants who were shown the words that we would associate with elderly people actually walked out of the room slower than the people who were shown the neutral words. They also said that they had worse posture, they hunched over more, which is also something we would associate with elderly people. Another really famous study was done where participants were asked by a Confederate, they didn't realize that this person was part of the study, to hold their coffee. And while they were holding this coffee, they were given a story to read, and the story was a kind of ambiguous story about main protagonist, and then they were asked to rate whether they thought that the protagonist was warm and generous or cold and off-putting. And they found that 80% of the participants who were holding a hot coffee said that he was warm and generous, and 80% of the participants that were holding a iced coffee thought that he was cold and off-putting. So these are really profound results about the subconscious priming and how it can affect us. The issue is that these studies have not had a great track record of being replicated. This is part of the reproducibility crisis in psychology, and these priming studies are actually the prime example of that crisis. So a lot of people have said that priming doesn't matter, and because of this have basically thrown out the entire idea of priming. But what I want to talk about is what we can take from it. So I don't think we should be that surprised that seeing the word Florida may not make us walk slower, right? There's too many associations we could have with Florida. It's too indirect of an effect. But I do think that priming is actually extremely important. That when we prime ourselves with pictures of loved ones, pictures of people that inspire us, quotes that inspire us, that is an active priming. It's not a subconscious priming, it is a conscious priming where we are intentionally priming ourselves. And another area of research in psychology that is very famous and very important is research on the placebo effect. So we know that the placebo effect can have a profound influence on us. It has the biggest influence when we are measuring things that are mostly our own perceptions. So the placebo effect has profound implications for pain management, less profound implications for things that are much more objective. So while there's some evidence that a placebo treatment might reduce swelling in the knee, there's other evidence that said it probably won't. And that's a direct measurable thing that has nothing to do with our perception if we're just having an independent person measure the amount of fluid in our knee. But for things like pain, for things like alertness, for things like our subjective well-being. These perceptions are strongly influenced by the placebo effect. So a lot of people have said, well, the power pose is nothing more than a placebo effect. And some people who say that as if it doesn't work. But I would say that it absolutely works, and it absolutely is just a placebo effect. We think of the placebo effect as something where we have to trick ourselves into doing something. We have to take a fake pill without knowing it in order to reap the benefits of the placebo effect. But we get placebo effects all the time. If you watch a scary movie, I could take your blood and your hormone levels would be very different. I didn't give you anything. That's just a placebo effect. Our mindsets create our placebos. So there's no reason why we can't take ownership of the placebo effect and give it to ourselves. One of the important things about the power pose study that did fail to replicate when other researchers tried it is that in the original study, the participants were coached on how to adopt the power pose. Now, again, that is an issue of reproducibility. If they were coached in very specific ways, A, it's hard to reproduce that, and B, it does make it very likely that it was a placebo effect, or it makes it more likely that it could have been a placebo effect, and it's not just the act of adopting that pose. But I actually think that that's okay, because when we're coached, when we have this very specific thing and we believe it's going to work, it very likely will. So if you're watching this video and you're saying to yourself, those power poses are really stupid, they're not going to work, I don't like them, you are correct. It will not work. Any treatment like this, any placebo, anything that requires us to change our perceptions won't work if we don't think it's going to work and we don't want it to work. But if we want it to work, if we think it's going to work, and if we believe it's going to work, it can work for us. So take the initiative to take back your internal placebo effect, where you can create your mind states. You can choose how you want to feel. Now, I'm not making a broad suggestion that people who are depressed choose to do that, and people who are really happy just choose that all the time, but we can have influence over our states, over how we're feeling. So if you stand in the mirror for 2 minutes with the intention to make yourself feel better, with the mindfulness to make yourself feel better like this, it will very likely work. And it doesn't have to be this power pose. You can take one that is more personally meaningful to you. So when I want to increase my energy, sometimes even before doing these videos, but more often when I'm about to play sports or before a really important point in volleyball or something, I will do what I see LeBron James doing all the time because I love LeBron James. I'll go, yeah, let's go! Or I'll go like this. And that changes my perceptions of things. It puts me in a more confident state. Does it actually make me better? That's a more difficult question to answer. But it certainly raises my confidence level. It certainly raises my energy level. I'm much more engaged when I do that because I want to do it. I'm choosing to put myself in a more engaged state. And doing the physical act rather than just thinking it allows us to take a little bit more action so that we believe it even more. Certainly changing your physical state does change your mind state somewhat. Any physical change will always change your mind. Any mind change will always change your physical state, at least a little bit. The mind and body are inextricably linked. They are, in fact, you might not even want to think of it as a mind-body duality, but actually just as one system. So any physical change will change our mindset. But when we go in with the intention to change our mindset as well, that is when it is going to work best. So we know that increasing mindfulness will put us in a more positive state if we want it to. We know that increasing mindfulness increases our well-being. So if we take something that almost inherently will increase our mindfulness because it's different, because it's silly, and because we're choosing to do it, if we take that and combine it with a placebo effect, that will absolutely work. And that could be what happened in the Power Pose study. You increase people's mindfulness. Certainly you're going to be more mindful when you're told to stand like this than if you're told to just sit normally. You're in a different physical state. And if you have the intention to feel more powerful, you're told this is going to make you feel more powerful, here's how it's going to work, and this is what we want you to do, that placebo effect combined with the increased mindfulness will almost certainly work. So rather than throwing these studies out because the actual tiny physical act may not work, let's take what we can learn from them, that if we increase our mindfulness and introduce what we think is a placebo effect for us, it will work. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you will try to find placebo effects for yourself that work. Find your own version of a power pose. Find your own version of something that can change your mind state. Let me know in the comments below what you like to use to do this, and we'll see you next time.